Good evening, everyone. How is everybody doing? Welcome back to the Evermore podcast. We are back again, and this time I think we will focus very much on a certain game that happened last night. Newcastle find themselves just 90 minutes away from a first final trip to Wembley since 1999 in the FA Cup, and their first League Cup final since 1976. Yeah, we'll get sort of straight stuck into it in just a second. Obviously, Chris normally does. If a little bit of housekeeping. If you are new to the channel, if this is your first time with us, welcome. It's great to have you on board. If you'd like to drop a like on the video, and if you care to subscribe, that would be amazing too. We have just gone over the 2,400 subscriber mark, which is huge for us. So thank you very much to everybody that has subscribed recently. And we hope to bring you more and more content over the coming months. So we'll get stuck into this. 90 minutes away. The first leg possibly could have gone better, but you take a win into the next, into next week. I think some might be getting a little bit ahead of themselves, I guess, by saying, "Oh, definitely there." But is it right to be waving goodbye to Southampton already? Carl, come to you first.
No, it's not, and I think obviously, I know, Lee, you posted something online on Twitter saying it's actually great to see like all this shithousery that like we're getting accused of and we're doing, because for too long, I totally agree with Lee. For too long, we've always been a soft touch, and I think on Monday Night Football, I think Carragher even said the same. They're no longer a soft touch. And I think going back to last night, obviously with the help of VAR, they got their goal ruled out rightly. Because I was listening to the commentary and he said, it went off his hand and then it went onto the thought Dan Burns' knee to begin with. But then when they looked, it was like, it's off his. And I was like, well, it doesn't matter if it's gone off Dan Burns' knee. It's still a bloody handball. And it goes into the net. So, But yeah, I think I'd be very shocked, and it would probably be a big turnaround if Southampton came up to Newcastle and won, because I think Lee and yourself will probably agree. We ripped them apart last night, really, when you look at the stats and everything like that, and things I've been seeing in our group chat for a couple of weeks and getting slated a little bit is that we need to become more clinical and we need to start turning these draws in the league. But I know this is about the cup, but turning these draws, if you like, into wins or winning more comfortably, because we're on top, and it might just take, I think you said this last night, Mark, a top side that we're playing against, we might not get as many chances, or even if we do, we've got to start taking them. So that's why I don't think you can. If it was 2 or 3-0, what I felt it should have probably have been last night with the performance, then I'd say it's, the door's bolted. We're on the way to Wembley. But I think it would. I'm still more than confident. I still think we can do them up our end. But yeah, I think we should start getting a little bit excited. I mean, I was dead nervous yesterday, when I woke up. I don't know why. I just think it was. I went.
As were many others.
I know, yeah. I had to go down to bloody London, and then I missed my train, so I had to get the later train. So I was basically watching the match on my phone, and it was dropping in and out. So what I did see, and I watched the highlights and whatnot when I come back. But yeah, we just dominated. But I'm just slightly concerned about player burnout. A couple of people in particular. Almiron looks a bit tired. I think Willock, for all he's running, looks a bit tired, and I think Wilson looks a bit tired. So if it was me, I'd make a couple of changes, but I know obviously we're talking about the second leg.
We'll come on to that. Don't get ahead. I mean, you talked about the handball and stuff. I mean, the contentious one really is the other end, isn't it? It's the Joe Linton one that I think from multiple angles, it looks like it just hits his stomach and bounces down. There is, I think, one angle where it looks like it does just take a double deflection, and I talked about this last night, but it's so slight. I don't think you can make any argument that he gets a significant advantage from it.
I don't
Whereas
think
Armstrong does. So what were your thoughts on that one?
I don't think he touched his hand at all. I think it bounces off his midriff here, and it's just that his hand's very close to him. But look, I seen the angle from behind, and it looks clearly like where the ball is, because it's ricocheted off. It looks like it's touching his hand at the same time. But when you turn it from in front of the goal and look at the goalkeeper's view, you can quite clearly see a bit of daylight or the light between like his midriff. That's only ever slight, but that's to me. And we've had this before with VAR. It's like, because I watch a lot of rugby as well, and they ask for all the different angles and they go through it. If they're not convinced by one angle, they say, can you show us another angle? But you get to hear what they're saying, whereas we don't hear what's going on with VAR. So we don't know what they're asking for. But I just feel like the technology is not getting used enough. Because if you look at the Joe Linton goal, the referee said no goal. It went to VAR. And like the law says, it's got to be a clear and obvious error, which is fair enough. But there wasn't a long enough time. There wasn't a long enough time looking at it. But because the referee obviously gave it as a goal, they spent longer looking at it, which I thought was a bit weird. It should be black or white. It shouldn't be grey. And I think that's the problem with VAR, in my opinion.
It's still a human thing. Lee, on your thoughts on that, and obviously overall thoughts on the game itself last night?
Overall thoughts, I think, first things first, we had far too long to sit and worry about it. I mean, the draw was 2 weeks ago. Let's be honest, I think every Newcastle fan over the course of the past 2 weeks has built this up in their own minds, to the point where by 7:30 last night, I don't think I would be alone in saying I was shaking like a shitting dog. It was, and I found the match really a difficult watch, to be honest with you, because I was that nervous and that tense. But obviously, once it kicked off, we got into it. One thing that I noticed straight away. Now, Carl, I don't know whether you got to see it, but in the build-up, they were looking at how Southampton started against Manchester City a couple of weeks ago, and literally from the kickoff, Southampton were in the face, and they unsettled Man City really, really quickly. They got the crowd into the game and what have you. One thing I noticed last night, in the first 20 minutes, we didn't allow that. Newcastle were very, very controlled in retaining the ball for the first 20 minutes and attacked when they could attack, and they didn't take any risks, I didn't think, in the first 20 minutes. And that silenced the crowd. I mean, let's be honest, there was a lot of empty seats. I mean, what's going on down in Southampton where they can't fill the stadium for a League Cup semi-final? It's not as if Southampton have been winning Champions Leagues and FA Cups on a regular basis for the last 10 years. I couldn't believe there was empty seats, but we did quieten the crowd and settled into the game. You talked about not taking our chances, Carl. That is starting to become a worry, but you mentioned earlier that it might come and bite us on the arse. What I would say is I would rather miss a sack full of chances against Palace, Leeds, Southampton, Fulham, and what have you. Get that out of our system, missing those chances before we come up against the likes of Liverpool in a few weeks' time. I'd rather have the dry spell in front of goal now and not get beat because we're not playing particularly strong opposition.
But do you not think, like I said, though, do you not think that maybe I know we've had a World Cup, but there has been a run of successful games like quite quickly. And I know, do you not think it might be not burnout, that's the wrong word, but just because we've kept the same sort of settled side, especially those forward players, and especially that we press so hard, like you say, in that first 20 minutes, that there maybe is a...
The press is still, I would say the press is still there, though, and we are still creating the chances. We are still creating the chances. I think we're just going through a spell where, we couldn't hit a cow's arse with a banjo. I think that spell will naturally come to an end. It'll take one going in off Callum Wilson's arse or something along those lines to get him up and running again. But at the minute, he's clearly, struggling. I don't know whether it's a case of the illness that he had pre-Christmas. I even saw somebody mention the fact that they think he might have long COVID because he's not doing what he would normally do in terms of running in the channels.
Behind, is he? He didn't do
holding the ball up. He spent last night for the 65 minutes or whatever it was he was on the pitch, running basically just chasing their two centre halves down, side to side, getting no joy out of them.
And then coming into the centre circle to try and pick the ball up.
Yeah, so I'm not overly concerned about the chances as long as we're playing the opposition that we are playing at the minute. And despite missing those chances, we're still eking out the results, whether they be draws or whether they be sneaky 1-0 wins, as it was against Fulham and as it was last night. I mean, the chances, they said it on the commentary last night, they're falling to the wrong place. I mean, you've got Willock in the first half. He's put 2 into row Z. The second one, the volley at the far post, that's an awful miss. You've got Sean Longstaff. You've got Sean Longstaff in the second half, blazing one over into the away section. You've got Sven Botman at the far post. You don't want your chances falling to Sven Botman.
Jordan missed this absolute sit-up.
Yeah. I mean, that's just that's a Ronnie Rosenthal-esque miss. That'll go down in the annals of history and what have you. But I mean, even Longstaff, he missed an opportunity where there was potentially a back flick, a back heel, when he was stood on the 6-yard line. But one thing that I did notice last night, as soon as Isaac and Maxi came on, the whole dynamic changed.
Yeah.
It was a period where Southampton had been on top.
Yeah.
It was. They'd been on top, but the dynamic changed straight away. Walker Peters, who was causing us all sorts of bother, he's not got that free rein to bomb on down the right-hand side and get it down there.
Look behind him, didn't he, really?
Yeah.
And I thought when those two came on, we I don't mean direct as in playing long balls, but it seems to be that Isak and Maxi both sort of, when they had the ball at their feet, they were looking to go like direct and run with the ball, which I think when Almiron was on, and who was on the other side? Willock. Was it Willock? Yeah.
Yeah.
And Joe Linton swapping over. It was more like intricate play and then giving the ball to Trippier and then a nice little pass over, whereas it sort of became freestyle when them two came on. Obviously, there was a little bit good end product, especially with the goal, which was class. And the fact that Isak ran into the crowd and like no one knew where he was.
Kieran Trippier shit himself, didn't he? Yeah, but no, I mean, they did change the dynamic. I mean, that's the way Isak stood up that centre half, slowed him down, stopped him, and just left him within 3 yards. I think that tells you everything you need to know about what sort of player that lad's going to be for us. I think he's got 6 appearances, top 7 appearances. He's got 3 goals and an assist. Yeah, he's just come back from a long-term injury. And listen, there's every argument to say that Isak should start the next game for that reason and the fact that Wilson's clearly misfiring. But I also thought Maxi last night when he came on, looked close to being back to his best. He's had a few substitute appearances recently where he's tried those mazy runs and those dribbles and what have you, and he's been unsuccessful. He's been dispossessed. But last night, particularly when we got the fella sent off, that was Maxi in his pomp from 2 or 3 years ago.
I think the thing with that. Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say exactly that. I think that we're just talking about the difference between the way they're playing. I think when Willock was on, it was very much looking for the gap in behind and getting him running into those free gaps, whereas Maxi likes the player in front of him so that he can run at the player and commit them, and that causes the red card, doesn't it, in the end? And the different, you touched on it there, the different dynamic that those two give you, and I know we'll come on to this in a bit about who starts, but I think that's telling for next week, and it certainly opens up the prospect for changes at that point. I just want to just quickly, before I come back to your call, just a couple of the comments that have come in. Roger's back in the comments. Hello again, Roger. Obviously, what you said before about VAR, the tech is there, the operator's not. We've said this right from the very beginning, that the people that are using VAR aren't fit for purpose. Some of the decisions that we've seen over recent weeks just go along to show that, and it's not being used properly. Thank you very much, Jens. Jens, there's a lovely comment for us, so thank you very much for that. Just BT on the Joe Linton, it looked inconclusive. I think that is absolutely right. It's one of those where because it's given as a handball on the field, that's not going to get overturned because it's not clear. That it comes back to that clear and obvious question, and it's such a horrible thing. But there's no conclusive proof that it does touch his hand as well, which is frustrating. And PK just wants you to take your hat off, Carl. That's
Can I just on the subject of the what you call VAR decision, particularly the one around Joe Linton. For me, it's not a handball as long as I've got a hole in my arse. One thing I mentioned in the chat last night, the referee. Let's have a quick chat about the referee. A chap called Stuart Atwell. He should never have refereed a game professionally again in his life after that incident that he had at Watford a few years ago. Don't know if anybody's seen it, but Watford were playing, I think it was Reading, at Vicarage Road, and the ball actually went out for a goal kick. He went out for a goal kick, and he awarded a goal. He actually awarded a goal. The ball hadn't gone anywhere near the net, it had gone behind for a goal kick, and he awarded a goal. Now, I've got a question about how somebody who can make that type of error can be promoted, over-promoted, to the point where he's refereeing Premier League games and he's refereeing League Cup semi-finals. I'm sorry, every time we've got Atwell, I look and I think the bloke shouldn't be on a football pitch with a whistle in his mouth. He should have been, what you call it, banished from the game then.
It is one of the worst decisions I've ever seen given in a football match for that ghost goal. It's just absolutely unbelievable.
Crazy.
And I'm all for people that make a mistake and come back, but that's an unforgivable mistake. I mean, it wasn't even close. It wasn't. We've seen them when some of them have gone through the side netting and it looks like it's gone in, but that wasn't one of those. And there were a couple of incidents like that in the sort of championship level where that sort of thing happened. And again, the officials in those games just they shouldn't be allowed to progress to that. This
is why the technology is not getting used properly, though, because if I know they've set the rules on what they use the technology for, but there's that much money and there's that much riding on relegation, promotion, getting to a cup final and stuff like that. If we had drew 0-0 or went 1-0 down or something like that, and say the Armstrong goal got given and the Joe Linton one didn't, we would have been in uproar. There would have been letters to the FA and all the rest of it, because we don't know, as Roger said there, we don't have audio and we never get to listen or get to see how they've got to that decision. And I think if it was transparent and we did, then I think everybody would probably accept VAR a little bit better than what it is. They do it in other sports, so I don't understand why they can't do it in the greatest game of all.
I think it's supposed to be getting trialled this year, though, isn't it? Sorry. I think they are looking at trialling that. I can't remember which tournament it is, but they are looking at doing that so that the referees have to explain to the crowd exactly what they're looking for and exactly what they're doing. So that might come in.
The overriding view I've got of English referees that we see week on week is exactly that. They're weak. They're intimidated by the players. They're intimidated by the bigger name managers. They get intimidated by the crowd. That whistle for Joe Linton's goal last night only went about, if you watch it back, it was probably a good second and a half after Joe Linton had put it in the net. And the reason the whistle went, in my opinion, is because you've got half a dozen Southampton players waving their arms around.
And also the player line on the deck.
And the player line on the deck. And he's just gone, yeah, it must be a foul then, without having the bottle to go across to the screen, look at the decision again properly, and turn around and say, actually, I was wrong. And that's the thing I said. I think you've got referees in the Premier League and in England in general that are weak. But listen, if we'd have offered any of us a 1-0 win last night, before we set off, before we kicked off, I'd have ripped both of your arms off. So I don't want people to think that I'm not happy. I just think I get frustrated with the referees. A 1-0 win. Listen, we score first next week, the tie's done.
Yeah.
We score first next week, the tie's done. If they score first, we'll get edgy. But if they score first next week, the crowd will be properly up for it in terms of encouraging Newcastle. So, listen, I'm absolutely over the moon. I wrote some notes before we started talking about it, and I described last night as a fucking terrifying experience. I hated it. It was awful. It was because I just want to get there. Whatever happens after that, I'll accept.
The thing is, Lee, I think this, hopefully, fingers crossed, this might become a regular occurrence.
I hope it gets easier.
Yeah, but it's right though, because I think you listen, you look at social media, you talk to your friends, you tweet chat in the group, and I think that there's still that lingering thing in the background about the Ashley era. So I think people just are programmed for something to go wrong, aren't they? And I think it's always like, that's why I think Newcastle fans still on Twitter, especially if someone else, like a pundit, says something, they all jump on it and get aerated about it. I'm like, just chill and relax. Like, the best thing to do is not even respond. But I just think it's, at the moment, it's probably programmed. It's programmed in all of us that we've had 14 years of sheer, like in the wilderness of, and look what's happening now with Everton, about how they're like literally losing their heads on Twitter and everywhere else. And, you know, I think we probably showed a little bit more class than what they did in terms of how we reacted to 14 years of nothing. But I think it's probably is. That's what it is, mate. We're just programmed for something to go wrong.
Yeah. Just to come back, there's a quick message here from T-Dog. Ref didn't know why he'd given the foul, whether a handball or a foul. I think he's absolutely right. Watching the rugby, how they use video evidence, and absolutely bang on the money. Fans will tolerate it far more if they can actually hear the referee, the thought process behind it. There's that famous clip of Jared Gillett, isn't there, in the Gillett in the Australian League, where he talks it through as to, well, let's look at the comment about, well, let's sell it a little bit more by looking at this. But the thought process and the reasoning behind what they were doing makes perfect sense, and you will accept that as a fan if you go, all right, that makes some sense to me. Come out and tell me why you've done it. But the only other one that it was, I guess, possibly looked at by VAR, but it was one that caused a bit of ructions from Southampton fans last night. Was the was the wipeout of Gineppo by Nick Pope. And there were a few comments that I've picked up online. I think this came from one of the Newcastle sites. Forgive me, I've forgotten to write down which one. But some of the Twitter users saying Nick Pope just nearly killed somebody, while another reference, the NFL tweeting Nick Pope playing the wrong type of football, arguing that he should have been sent off for it. I mean, to me, as a goalkeeper, you come out, the ball is there to be won. He has gone through him, but he's won the ball in the air. Gineppo stopped. There's nowhere else for Pope to go to try and win the ball.
It's a little bit different when you look at some of the cynical fouls that they did last night. So the pull back on Bruno, the tackle on Almiron, that was deliberate. Whereas I think when you're jumping through the air, you're not in control of your body and where you're going to go. Obviously, the pace that he runs at it and the fact that he jumps for a header and wins it, that player's not expecting Nick Pope to come out and do that. So he's probably not braced himself to try and win. If he went to try and win a header, I think it's a different outcome with Pope not like body slamming him like a wrestling move. It just happened that he probably wasn't expecting that, but Pope won the ball. He won the ball and went through the player, but as in the air, it's different to someone going through someone with a trailing leg or a deliberate pullback like that. Them are the ones that wind me up, because I think this, without going into more refereeing stuff and things, but
it could be here for hours.
Like the yellow and a red card, like for something so deliberate like that, it just doesn't seem to fit the crime. That it's not a red card. Obviously, if it's last man, it is. But if it's so cynical like that, it's not. It just winds me up when players cheat and literally do like a professional foul. I know we do it and we take one for the team sometimes, but I think that pissed me off last night when Almiron just got chopped down, or when that player pulled Bruno back.
The one on Almiron was an awful tackle, because the way that he ended up almost scissoring his legs, that could have been nasty. I don't agree with it would have been anything more than a yellow card, but it's those sort of things. Whereas those comments from Roger and PK there are absolutely right. He's gone with it. His eyes are completely on the ball. He's he's won the header effectively, and it's Dan Juma's stance that's got him clobbered at that point. So, I mean, I'd never see that as a foul.
On the Pope incident, I've coached kids for 20 years, and you always tell the kids, doesn't matter what age they are, don't pull out of a tackle because you're scared, because you're more likely to get injured. Gineppo, last night, his arse went. He saw Pope coming out, and his arse went. And as a result, what you call it, I mean, if you look at it, freeze frame it, is like that as Pope's approaching him. If he'd gone through and committed to the challenge, he'd have flipped Pope. Pope would have been the one that got injured. Instead, he just froze, lost his arse, and he got cleaned out as a result.
Yeah.
What I was pleased, I've just criticised the referee. What I was pleased was he gave a throw in. And I think he gave the right decision. He gave a throw in.
Yeah, that was well.
Tells you everything you need to know.
That was.
Yeah,
definitely.
No, God's agree. It was the right decision. They can have a whine and a moan about it, but I guess every Newcastle fan would probably do the same if the roles were reversed. But it doesn't stop it. It wasn't a foul. So I think we'll take that time. We'll move on. I think we'll shift the focus on to next week. I know we've already sort of touched on this slightly. Lee, I'll come to you first. Obviously, it sets the tie up nicely at St James's Park now. It's going to be a ridiculous atmosphere. St James's will be absolutely rocking. I would imagine there will be something sensational from more flags too. How do you see it going? Who do you think? Will there be changes to the lineup, do you think?
A lot of debate. Wilson, should he be dropped? Should Isaac replace him? Should Maxi come in because Willock's potentially looking tired? I'll be perfectly honest with you. The team should be whoever Eddie Howe and Tyndall decide it should be. They've got enough credit in the bank now that I'm not going to question if they decide to go with the same 11 as they did last night. They've gone with that because they think that's the best team to get the result that we need. If they make changes, likewise, and what have you. Personally, if I was Eddie Howe or Tyndall, I would make a change. I'd only make the one change, though. I would take Wilson out of the firing line because he does look very, very jaded. I don't agree with some of the narrative we see that he's shy, he's not good enough anymore. He's just going through a bad spell. He's just going through a bad spell, and the bloke's done what you call it, pulled up trees for us over the course of the past 3 years. But he needs pulling out the firing line, and Isaac has proved over the course of the past few games he's ready to step into the breach. He's more than ready to step into the breach. He comes across as a player who is desperate to prove himself. And when you've got a player with that hunger, you let them loose. And I think that's what we did with Bruno for the first 6 weeks after we signed him. He was desperate to get that start. And when he got that start, he was not letting that player score. And I think we've got a similar scenario with Isaac. In relation to Maxi, a lot of calls for him to start next week. Whilst I said earlier he looked back to his marauding best, I wouldn't start him. The reason I wouldn't start him is if you start him and you do expose Dan Burn to Walker Peters again, and Maxi isn't giving Dan Burn that protection that he's going to need, Southampton might nick a goal. God forbid they might nick two. Can you imagine if we started Maxi and we got caught down the right-hand side twice? And all of a sudden we're losing 2-1. The anxiety would just spread around the stadium. It would. So for me, I think you have to go with Willock again. At least for the first 65, 70 minutes. Make sure that we kill the game. And then if we're still winning 1-0 on aggregate after 65, 70 minutes, when they're tiring, let Maxi loose. Let Maxi loose to go and do what he did last night. But for me, Maxi is PK's just saying there, Maxi is an impact sub. Win the tie, and then introduce Maxi just to sort of take it home, sort of thing. But for me, I would stick with the same 11 apart from Callum Wilson. I'd bring Isaac in for it. One thing I will say is I thought Leicester was outstanding. I thought Arsenal at the end of last season was outstanding. I can go back years and years and years with atmospheres. I don't think I'm going to have seen one quite like next Tuesday, up close and personal for a long, long time. I literally cannot wait. I can't wait for it because I just think it's going to be one of those nights that'll go down in folklore for a long, long time. I think both fans will have something planned for it. everybody's being asked to bring the scarves. We know how effective that was against Leicester. I do genuinely think we'll win the tie. We've got to remember, next week, all we need is a draw.
Yeah.
we need a draw, and we're through. If we get a draw, that's good enough. And I'll be honest with you, I'd sell it for a draw next week. I would. I think the reaction at the final whistle, if we get through, is going to be massively, massively emotional for a lot of people there'll be people in that stadium next week who've never seen Newcastle in a final at Wembley. Lots of people in that stadium who've never seen Newcastle in a final at Wembley. I'm fortunate to have been there in 98 and 99. Devastating, but I'm quite happy to try it again. You can taste those Wembley already.
You're not going to give that up in a hurry. I'm gutted. I can't be there next week because I think just sampling that atmosphere would just be amazing. It will look great on TV, won't it? But just to be in amongst that would be an amazing experience for everybody involved. And you're absolutely right. There will be people that will never experience that.
I can see me tickets from here.
Yeah. There's a couple of comments on here. I know Roger's taking the mickey with this one a little bit. It does look a decent front three. Unfortunately, Gordon would be cup tied because I think he's already played in the competition this season for Everton. I think we've had Pique's agreement with you on Maxi. He also says that Isak should start. T-Dog again is in agreement with you, Lee, that Maxi is much better introduced from the bench. Jens there, love Isak, but won't say he's better than Wilson, just different options. Wilson out of form at the moment. I think that's right. We sort of touched on this last night or on Monday night. It was more about looking at Wilson's stats, and he has had, it's now 9 games without a goal. This has happened before. He's not a regular occurrence for Wilson, but he has this sort of every season where there is a little patch where he does drop off. I think the illness, I think that lack of fitness has affected him, but that will come back with a little bit of time. And if it is something like long COVID, it may just take a little bit longer to get over. Where are we? Roger, never been in Wembley, old or new.
He does know. Wilson does know that he's struggling as well. Sorry. You saw him when he was substituted last night. I don't know if you'll have noticed. There was a little shake of the head. And that's him. That's him going at himself. He knows that he's not performing to the level he has previously and the level that he's capable of. What would worry me is if he didn't know. If he came off that pitch thinking everything was fine and there was no reason for the change, it was just to mix things up. He knows that he's not performing well. If you get to the point where he thinks he's performing fine, then you've got a problem. You have. So for me, take him out of the firing line, let him generate that hunger again. Yeah, what you call it. Let him be angry that he's being dropped for a couple of games and then reintroduce him. And you'll see it'll be a different animal for me.
Yeah, no, I can't disagree with that at all. Carl, obviously next week, your thoughts on the lineup and how things will go?
You see, I'll go the other way. So I do agree with Lee. I was going to bring that point up that it's not the first time that he's been substituted recently where he looks pissed off that he's been subbed. Willock's done the same as well because I probably know there's people chomping at the bit to get in, like an Isak, like a Sam Maximan, that if they have a run of good games that they might not get in for a while. I don't think Eddie Howe will do that with Wilson, though, because he knows him, he trusts him. Whether he's looking jaded or not, you know that if Wilson does get an opportunity, more often than not, he will take it. And I think differently, Lee, to you, where I think what Eddie Howe will probably try and do is play him into form. So I think you might still see Isak come in, but it might be he might go in the hole and surprise everybody like he did when he came on against Fulham. He just sat in that hole and you floated around. And then obviously you had the likes of Longstaff and Joe Linton in the middle, and they played really well. I know Bruno wasn't there, but it might be someone like a Longstaff who might come out, but then you throw all the pressing element out that he brings and the distance he covers. Yeah. So I think there's arguments for and against making a change, but the fact we've got a week off because we've got no game this weekend means that the players can rest again. And you know what Eddie Howe's like? It'll probably be exactly the same team again that he played last night. And I think he has said on numerous occasions that since he's been back, Isak hasn't had a full week's training yet because we've had games in between that. So the fact that we've got this full week now might sort of show you the point that he might actually start him, because he has made some telling impacts when he's come on. And I would like to add one more thing about last night. The fact that it was 0-0 and the fact that obviously we went to win the game with those two substitutions. I think the mentality of Isak and Saint-Maximin was different. And I do agree with Lee that if you play Saint-Maximin from the start, I worry about his tracking back. I've always worried about that. And Dan Burn isn't the left back. We know that, but we know that when Trippier bombs up, we make a back three and we're solid. So if you've got that isolation of Saint-Maximin not tracking back, then that's a little bit of a concern for me. So I think until we've maybe scored a goal or a couple of goals, I don't think Eddie Howe will change it at all.
And whatever he goes with, lineup wise, you've got to trust him. If he starts Matt Target at number 9 next week, you've got to trust him because there'll be a reason for it.
Absolutely.
As I say, you've just got to allow because I saw yesterday there was a lot of noise on social media about the fact that Isak hadn't started. There was a lot of noise about the fact that ASM should be getting a start because of the fact we've missed 5 for the last few weeks. Listen, I'm possibly a mistake, but I trust the bloke implicitly. He's earned that over the course of the past 14, 15 months for us to say, right, that's your decision. We're going to back your decision. And I'll do that again next Tuesday. I might waver a bit if he did start Matt Target at centre forward, but you get the gist of what I'm saying.
I think we'd all question that, to be fair, Lee, if you're doing something like that. But you're right. You'd look at it and go, well, what's he seen? What plan is there in place for him? Because he's obviously something that means that makes sense. So you back what the gaffer said. You absolutely spot on. He's had such an incredible last 14, 15 months that you trust implicitly what he's going to do next. Go on.
I was going to say, in terms of Eddie Howe, you look at his record since he's been here. I think if you include the cup games, I think he's lost 8 games or something like that. Do you know what I mean? So we do have to trust him. Obviously, me saying, I think he will probably just keep the same starting 11 and he will continue to get Isak back into fitness. When Isak's raring to go and fully fit, then that's a real option. As PK has said in the notes there, we've got options for the first time in years. There's real options there when Isak's fully fit, because Wilson and Isak are 2 slightly different players. Wilson's a poacher, isn't he, at the end of the day? He can run in behind. He is quite quick, but he's more of a poacher, whereas I think Isak's more of a complete forward, so you can play on the wide and cut back in, like what Thierry Henry used to do, if you like. So we do have options, but I just think, like one of the guys have just said then, and it's probably the most important game that we've had in however long it is, since the last semi-final we were at, which was, I forgot, years and years
2005.
ago. Yeah, so
Cardiff.
So there you go. I just think he'll go with the tried and trusted, especially with a week's worth of training and no game.
50% of the defeats that you mentioned, I think it's 8 defeats. 50% of those have come against Man City and Liverpool.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
it's a crazy stat.
No, it's not a very bad record, is it? I think
just one with Cambridge and one with Sheffield Wednesday.
Yeah.
There's very much opposite ends of the spectrum there, isn't there? No, T-Dog saying that it doesn't see Eddie experiment with new formation. Isak as a number 10 in the single most important game of the season. Yeah, he's not going to mess around. He's not going to screw around with the way that Newcastle play. I think the only thing that you would say is there a need to withdraw Wilson and give him a rest, give him time, give him the fire back. I think you touched on that before, Lee, as well. If you take him out the firing line, the hunger from him, because he's a selfish striker at the end of the day. He wants to be scoring goals. And you see that from his reaction of getting taken off. If you remove him from the firing line, he's hungry then to get back in, to score again with every opportunity that he then gets, to try and remove Isak from the side. So that's what you want. You want that back and forward between the two. I think personally for next week, I probably would start Isak, having seen the way that he's impacted the games over the last couple of weeks. And Carl, you're right. If he's not had a full week's training, he now has that opportunity to get that under his belt. Make sure he is fully fit to play 60, 70, 80, 90 minutes, and then let him loose, because he looks like he's hungry to come in and prove a point and take that position by the scruff of the neck and not look back. So that would be the only one I think I would make. I see the logic in maybe he's playing Maxi, but again, I think Willock and Joe Linton are so interchangeable in that midfield. I don't think you disrupt that, because they can drop and you can swap them over. And you see when Joe gets forward, and especially the game against Leicester when Almiron plays that ball through to him and he can't, it's the calmest I've ever seen Joe Linton take a shot, and that's what you want in that position. And I think you're absolutely right. Maxi is an impact sub, especially if you then want to push the likes of Walker-Peters back like he did last night, and it gives him something else to really worry about. When they're a little bit more tired, he comes on with fresh legs and causes havoc. So yeah, I think it's not going to be an easy one. I think it will be cagey, but I think if Newcastle get an early goal, then they could run away with it. That atmosphere gets on top of Southampton at that point. But that's what you want. You want the early goal. You want them to take the initiative and really drive home the dagger and march on their way to Wembley.
I think depending on how the fans are before the game, and like Lee said, there'll be a lot of pumped up, a lot of emotional people in the stadium. I think it will be some atmosphere. And I know these are professional footballers, but the atmosphere could get into Southampton's head from the off. And if we start fast, which we normally do at St. James's Park, like even though we didn't score, we scored the 3 quick goals against Leicester on Boxing Day, and we should have been 2 or 3 up inside 10 minutes against Leicester in the Cup. So if we can start fast like that and like you say, nick a goal, all of a sudden you're 2-0 up, I just think they'll just crumble. I just think they'll crumble. And I think the players will relax a little bit more and stop expressing themselves without having to worry too much. And I think you will see maybe more composure.
Yeah, the other thing that does, if they do score early, it draws Southampton out, because then they have to come out and play.
Yeah.
And the amount of pace in that attack then leads them wide open to the counter-attack as well. And every time, how good Bruno is on the ball, and Trippier is at hitting those, even Shaw and Botman, to play those balls over the top to the runners, either whether that's Willock, Wilson, Isak, or Almiron, to get then in behind the fullbacks and the centre-backs. I just think that's exactly what you want. You want that quick start. So yeah, I think that's got to be the focus. I want to come on to the next section. That's a little bit of a segue into that will go in terms of the atmosphere. Obviously, there's a week left of the transfer window. Transfer window closes on the day of the semi-final. Could we see a couple of signings paraded in front of a rocking St. James's Park on Tuesday? Do you think there's any chance of that?
Yeah.
Lee, I'll come to you first.
I do think there's every possibility that you'll see at least one new signing by close of play Tuesday, and I wouldn't be surprised if they deliberately orchestrated it to parade them before the match. I think, as a newly arriving player at Newcastle, can you imagine what it would have felt like had you walked out and been introduced before that Leicester game with those scarves and the flags and what have you? It's just, it's a perfect scenario for the owners to say, here you go, you wound up, let's get you a little bit more wound up. Listen, on the subject of the atmosphere, I'll go on to transfers in a minute. I think there's every possibility that Southampton could be beaten before kickoff next week. I genuinely do, and that might be pie in the sky, but there's a lot of people have said Leicester were beaten before the game was kicked off because of what was going on in the stadium and what have you. And you add parading a new signing or even two to that sort of mix, and it'll just reach boiling point. And Southampton have got some quite young, quite inexperienced, I think, players as well. They've got some old, obviously Ward-Prowse and the like, but that's some atmosphere to go to Newcastle in that sort of situation with the pressure already on. You know you can't concede the first goal. You know you're going to have to try and score. I just think it could be a really, really difficult night for Southampton. Transfers-wise, yes, I do think I'd be gobsmacked if we don't sign one, potentially even two, in between. Yeah, PK's right. Arsenal were beaten before kick-off back in May. Yeah, 100%. But I definitely think we'll sign one, possibly two. I do think Gordon will land at St James's Park. There's been rumours today that the asking price is 60 million. The lad wants to move. The lad wants to move. It's what you call being widely reported. It will probably be, I would say, one of the more divisive signings I've seen at Newcastle. I mean, there is a clear, split opinion on whether we want him or whether we don't. But I mentioned the other day, listen, Craig Bellamy was a little shit. He was a horrible little shit when he arrived at Newcastle. I remember seeing him at St James's, I think it was for Coventry the first time, and he was a horrible little shit then. Yeah, but he was their horrible little shit. And I see that exactly the same way as I look at Anthony Gordon. When he came to St James's, for Everton, and he had the ruck with Trippier and he had the ruck with Shaw and what have you, I'd love to have got my hands on him himself. But you flip that and he's on playing in black and white stripes. And I'm sorry, I adored Craig Bellamy when he played for Newcastle. I thought he was a wonderful player because he was, but I also liked the little shit that he was and the fact that he would do nothing but try and wind opposition players up. He'd nip, he'd scratch, he'd kick and whatever. The only thing he didn't do was bite. Yeah, and that sort of player, we talked earlier about shithousery. I love it. I genuinely do love it. For so long, Newcastle have been a soft touch. Teams have come and they've bullied Newcastle. And it's awful to see because teams just didn't give us any respect. They knew they could, push us around and what have you, and there'd be no retaliation. What we've seen this season, we saw, Jacob Murphy running across to, jump on Kai Havertz at St James's Park at the final whistle. Last night, Alan St Maximin, running across, standing up to a 6'4" centre-half because the centre-half's having a crack at Bruno Guimaraes. You've got Jacob Murphy doing the wave thing, sort of. I'm not going to comment on that. But then you've got Bruno, going up to, again, the centre-half and getting in his face and riling him because he's, being booked and what have you. We don't do enough of that. Sorry, we do now, but we never did enough of that. You look at all of your top teams, they've got shit houses in there who will try and gain any advantage that they can. Sorry, I'm going off on a tangent here. And I think Anthony Gordon fits that profile entirely. He's had a poor start of the season, but he's playing in a terrible team with a terrible manager. Yeah. You think what Eddie Howe and Tyndall could do with that hunger, that attitude, that pace, they could turn him into a right player. And I do think he'll rock up at St James's Park before the end.
He's got the one thing as well, Lee, fair enough. You talk about his dress sense. You talk about how he is off the pitch. You talk about how he is on the pitch in terms of his attitude. It doesn't bother me, any of that. What I will say is he's got raw talent.
Yeah. So David Beckham wore a skirt. I would have had him when he was wearing that skirt.
The thing is, though, mate, that I think he's probably splits opinions because of obviously how he is as a person. But I've also seen clips of him from an alternative world, if you like, where he was buying loads and loads of food for the food bank in Liverpool with his own money, filling stuff up. So he's doing his own bit, but there is a player in there There is absolutely a player in there.
But everybody's basing their opinion of him as a person now on what they see on the football pitch. Nobody knows what he's like away from the pitch. Bellamy was a horrible little shit, as I say, but away from the football pitch, his reputation was he's a really, really top bloke.
Yeah.
But you step over that white line and you turn into a different animal.
I don't think we'll pay. I don't think it'll be 60 million. I think it'll be something more along like 30, 35 million with some add-ons. Do you know what I mean? About that'll be attached with Europe, and then they'll just do the Chelsea. They'll just sign him on a 7-year contract, and they'll just split that fee before the loophole closes in the summer. So that's what will happen. And you know, I do agree with Lee. I think he will arrive, which will be that additional support in the front that we do need. But I also reckon I think we'll sign a central midfielder as well. I just feel we'll sign a holding midfielder. Obviously, I know Flamengo have apparently rejected that third bid for the central midfield player, the young kid,
Franca.
Yeah,
he's more of an attacking midfielder though than he is. He sort of plays in and around the forward line than he does the sort of the centre of midfield. The one that sprung up today actually that I'd seen before was Juventus' player Weston McKennie, who's sort of been offered around a little bit, and I don't know whether he would be an answer to come in and give that midfield a little bit more strength, a little bit more. Definitely another option in there. I think he's a very good player. You don't play for Juventus if you're a mug, although possibly at the moment with the way that their finances and things have gone, but that's a different story. But he definitely add another option would potentially free up Bruno to be a little bit more forward thinking than have to cover further back. So yeah, I think you're right, Lee. I think there's definitely the option for one or two to come in, or there's the possibility for that to happen. Some of the comments in here, again, sort of talking about Gordon's fee. Aaron there, don't want going for 60 million. I don't think 60 million is going to be anywhere near the fee. I think the 35 with add-ons is probably the right sort of area for that. He does have bags of potential. He does have bags of ability already. And again, use that shithousery. I think that sort of thing suits the side at the moment. When you're talking about players running across to confront Kaleta Carr last night and things, the funniest part of that whole process was obviously Jacob Murphy running in and then sort of hiding a little bit and then waving him off was one thing. But as Carr was running around, sort of pushing around everybody, and then stumbled upon Joe Linton and stopped and went, I give up. I'm not even going to go there because you just know that. I mean, Joe would flatten him.
I think I'm not a lip reader, but I think Joe Linton was just using the words "easy." He's just got his hand up against him like that, and he's just going easy. If he comes up to you and says that, you're going to take it easy, aren't you?
That's not a fight I would be picking at all. I mean, he is a unit.
When he scored his goal, he had biceps on biceps. He was just massive. I think he's been. I mean, listen, we talk about the midfield and stuff like that, but I seriously think I was a bit concerned when Joe Linton had his injury and then he came back. But I would like to say over the last sort of 4 or 5 weeks when we've come back, I do feel he's probably been our best player overall. He's always, Trippier's been exceptional, but his deliveries hasn't been there, but he's still creating loads of chances. But Joe Linton's been a solid 8 out of 10 every week, even in some cases like more. So he's doing it all. And we talk about the midfield, and I just think that if we add another sprinkling of something in that midfield, a little bit of creativity, which is I think what we need, because we said at the top of the show, we're creating chances, but we're not taking them. So if we can just have that little, or they're not falling at the right people, so if we can just start splitting the defenses with some more clever people and not just relying on Bruno all the time, I think that's the next step, isn't it, in terms of finding that player?
Yeah, I think one of them, the name here, the Boca Juniors, I think it's Alan Varela, the Boca Juniors kid who does look a wonderful footballer as well, to be perfectly honest. And if he's available for in and around that fee, that fits that that sort of Eddie Howe mold now, of bringing them in and building on that. And he could definitely give you something else in that midfield. So I guess we'll see over the coming days what happens. I'd like to think from a Newcastle point of view that, you know, you're absolutely right. You walk one or two out on that field on Tuesday night, and it would be it's going to be ridiculous, the reaction to it. We talked about this at the back end of last season when you say you're heading into the transfer window. Just take a video of that Arsenal game. And we said this at the time. You take a video of the Arsenal game. You can do that now with the Leicester game. Whichever game you want to do, just send them the video. When you're trying to court these players, just go, this is what you're coming to. These are the fans that you're coming to play for. There's going to be no better feeling than walking out on that field to that sort of reception, that sort of atmosphere, week in, week out. And it's not going to quieten down. We've kind of seen the prawn sandwich brigade at certain places. That's just not going to happen up here. The fans wouldn't allow it to happen. There isn't that mentality.
There was a report. Sorry, mate. There was a report, Mark, that was done by Sports Mail or something like that, and it had the 10 loudest stadiums in world football, and Newcastle was 8th or 9th in that. And there was some South American clubs in it, and obviously Celtic was in it, Dortmund. Some really loud stadiums, and Newcastle was the loudest stadium in England. And I think when it is rocking like that, from an atmosphere point of view, like, imagine if that can create more fans to get in somehow with some clever building of the stadium to make it even bigger. It would just be crazy. It would just be absolutely crazy. But I think, yeah, it was interesting what Ashworth said. I think it was in the Leicester game where he said, obviously, we're looking to get that balance. And we're talking about FFP. We're trying to get young kids coming in now, like the Karen Gold deal, and looking to... We spoke about this before, Mark, where they're doing the Chelsea model, where they're looking for these players in the City model. And then if we get 10 of them from wherever and only 2 of them break through, but when we've got all these players that we can sell on and make money off. But then it was interesting what Eddie Howe said in the press conference, saying basically he only wants to sign a player that's going to improve the first team. So to me, it's almost like Ashworth saying we've got a plan for the summer. We know what we want to do then. But Eddie Howe saying if there's an opportunity that arises now, we'll take it. And I think that's why I think we'll absolutely we'll get someone that will improve the 1 or 2 that will improve the starting squad, if you like.
Yeah.
I think it's an outside bet. I would still say it's an outside bet to be one of the players paraded next week.
Who's that?
I still think we might dip our toes in the water for Tielemans. I genuinely do. I think he's the sort of player I think that would improve us massively. I think he would complement Bruno. The fact that Shelby's out for another 4 to 6 weeks, the fact that we had a fucking heart attack when Bruno turned his ankle, and we were looking and thinking, well, what do we do in midfield? I think there'll be a realisation in the club that we're potentially one injury away in midfield from being in a bit of bother. So for me, I wouldn't be surprised if we dipped our feet in the Tielemans water before the end of the transfer window. It might not come off, but I think they'll attempt it. Just an opinion.
No, that's fair enough, and I think that's very. He's an outstanding player on his day. He's going to come relatively cheap. He's going to be available in the summer anyway. So if Leicester want to get any money for him, now's the time. They've got a week left to do it. So yeah, I think that's definitely a possibility, and I think that takes us nicely to the close, and we'll leave it at that. So thank you very much for watching, everybody. Thank you to Lee and to Carl for getting involved tonight as well. As I said at the start, look, if you are new to the channel, thank you for getting involved tonight. Thank you for watching. Please drop a like on the video. It really does help push the video out to the rest of YouTube and get more and more people involved. And drop us a subscribe if you want to. That would be absolutely brilliant. We're all going to go off for a fight with Nathan Jones now because that's what he seems to like to do. We're all going to back up Jason Tyndall there, aren't we? He's just aggravate the little guy. But enjoy the rest of your evening, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll look forward to next week.
See you guys.
Cheers, fellas.
Take care.
Bye.